So let's not take any more time. Let's move on to the next session immediately. I'm now going to introduce Song Bae, Nic, and Catherine, I think it is, and let them talk to you about. Well, I guess there's an element of addressing fragmentation in matchmaking platforms, isn't there? It's one of the main purposes, the lack of information in different places, silos, and all that sort of thing. So yeah, Song Bae, take it away and introduce your fellow compatriots.
Great, thank you. Starting my stopwatch to help you out, Mark. So
Oh, please, yes.
I just want to say, this title, when I see this, I think the subtitle should be, right, matchmaking platforms, how enterprise support organizations can become more resilient and less donor dependent. I think, like, as soon as I see matchmaking platforms, I think the subtitle will be, why do they always fail? Or, a story of a graveyard of different matchmaking platforms. So I am just as curious to hear from our two speakers about why this is not the case. So I'll be this. The reason I was invited to this is because I did a report on data, which I'll talk on and provide a few points briefly. But the other two speakers will introduce themselves, but just so that you know how they fit in my report, there were three potential recommendations, and this is recommendation C, option C. Nic being the infrastructure piece around AI, and Catherine, I think you go by Cate. We've never met. So you guys are also getting kind of the real deal here, because usually we get together and plan everything we're going to say, but we did not do that this time. And so you guys will get the live raw version. So you want to move forward, Nic? First of all, I just want to say that I really appreciate a lot of the things that people said before. So I'll just highlight some things that I don't know. Gilda Marie said from ACVO, there's no, this data that we're collecting, there's no plan on using it beyond the project. That in itself is pretty limiting. Also, there's no access, right? I mean, it's just these are well-known constraints, and I think people have been identifying them for a long time. So my report that I wrote, that I can provide a link in afterwards, so you don't go to it now. I'll just highlight three three kind of main takeaways that for myself that are not like mind-blowing. It's more just like structuring, articulating thoughts that I think come as no surprise to other people. The first one is a lot of the data that we're collecting is at the funds level, meaning it's for donors. It's kind of like flows, kind of like where is the market most active. But the kind of data for the people on this call that's valuable for the businesses you're working for, it's business level data, which is more challenging, it's more granular, but it's also more valuable. So there's very little data being collected at the SME level versus being collected at the fund flow level. The second thing is the data that's being collected even at the SME level was the impact data, which is valuable, like how many women are we reaching, what's the change in the income for the workers. But that's not going to really influence a bank on whether they're going to be making a loan or not. So we're collecting this data that's useful for the people paying for it, but it's not really useful for the business to be able to actually go out there and get a loan. It's not business operational level data. And then the last point I want to make is most relevant to the other two speakers as part of this session. There's two issues, and one is that there's just no data. And there is data, but it's just unstructured and we need to organize it. And so that's one question that we have to talk about. And I'm kind of curious, the last thing I'm going to end with are the questions I'd like Nic and Cate to answer when they present themselves. Of course, we can kick them all off into the discussion, but I feel even this part it'd be good to start addressing, and then we can dive into a little more deeply. So one is that last point, is this initiative between Vula and ESOs, that like the one that Cate runs, is it structuring existing data, or how does it even address the problem of the data not even existing at the SME level? The second question is just how does it work? Like operationally, it's just instead of saying we're empowering businesses, like what is the nuts and bolts of how this works? Who signs up? How is the data collected? I mean, as much as you can go into, so we can actually understand how it's operationalized. And then I guess the last two questions, what results? I mean, that would be really good to hear, because I think a lot of these things, there's a lot of marketing and then you never hear about them again. And finally, if the value is so much on the technology, in this case AI, how much does it matter about the quality of the BDS provider? Is their role really just to give you the names of the companies they work with, or what is that role, the value add that they're providing? So with that, I think it goes next to you, Nic.
Yes, it does. And
Okay,
thank you
thank you.
for all of those brand new questions that have nothing to do with our presentation, Song Bae. I'm going to address them now because they are very interesting. Thank you everybody for having us. This is great, and we're really excited to talk to you about how we see really these matchmaking platforms enabling BDS providers and enterprise support organizations to find one new avenue to become a lot more resilient in a market where we're seeing less and less donor participation, and where BDSs really need to start treating themselves as kind of independent and resilient organizations to continue to do their work. Vula is an AI and technology provider to the African SME funding ecosystem. We serve funders across the capital stack, from your favorite DFI all the way down to local lenders. The way that we interact in this ecosystem, and to start answering some of Song Bae's questions, is really that we believe that enterprise support organizations and BDS providers really represent an extremely valuable distribution mechanism for accessing SME operational data, for collecting it, but of course, for also benefiting from it. Put another way, and this came from some of the talks we heard earlier. In multi-stakeholder ecosystems, we're always asking questions around what are the incentives that each stakeholder has to participate, but also where is value captured. And so what Vula enables as digital infrastructure is, number one, to align on incentives, to enable BDS providers and ESOs, such as smart regional consultants that Cate is the CEO of, to actually leverage their existing experience and networks, not simply to provide their own pipeline of capable SMEs with connections to funders, but to actually materially benefit from that. Because if BDS providers are putting in the work to both source and guide and build the capacity of SMEs in their ecosystem, then isn't that also them creating value for funders, especially commercial financiers? And if they are creating that value, then don't we need platforms that can enable them to capture that value? And so this is exactly what Vula's AI does. It helps BDS providers such as SRC Kenya to utilize the existing data that they have about the SMEs. So this is to answer your first question, Song Bae. We utilize existing data first to actually identify which live funding products across all of Africa, from international impact funders all the way to local lenders, would be relevant for each individual SME in this ecosystem. Vula's AI is able to take unstructured data that you may collect during your capacity building programs or develop while you're delivering programs, and take that unstructured data and turn it into structured living profiles of SMEs. And then we use that data from the living profiles of the SMEs without sharing it externally. We actually bring in data from living funding products to match to SMEs. And that matching at scale is where the beginning of the value creation really happens. Instead of kind of leaving funding institutions to potential reach outs, or for you to remember them, or to relationships that ebb and flow, instead, Vula's infrastructure enables this matching to happen systematically. So with each new data update, with each time that an SME within one of these cohorts updates their business plan or their cash flow statement or their results or their cost basis, Vula's AI is able to rerun a match to find if there are new eligibility criteria being met across the ecosystem. And then finally, once that match has happened, Vula's infrastructure, usually through either WhatsApp or the web, is able to actually follow up and close the gaps on knowledge that funders would like to have upfront in the form of a deal note. So in terms of what this looks like practically, you may have a business within one of your recent cohorts. You've got some data about them. Vula takes that data and finds that they're a potential match to 5 different funders across the ecosystem. Each of those funders has their own unique eligibility criteria, which the AI can follow up with and let you know exactly what data and documents would be needed for them to get to the next stage of qualification. Once that gap has been filled, Vula's AI automatically generates a deal note, which gets sent to the funder, and that funder is then able to actually complete the deal. And if the deal is successfully deployed on, then Vula actually captures a fee for that, which gets shared with the BDS provider. And that's how you're able to capture the value. Now, this is just one avenue of creating value for ESOs and BDS providers. But we believe that if we get the incentives right, what we'll be able to do is to make more and more robustness and resilience for BDS providers as they're all trying to figure out how to become less donor dependent. What we've got next is, of course, Catherine Gitonga, who is the lead of a very significant BDS provider in Kenya, Smart Regional Consultants. And Catherine, before I hand over to you, I think one of the important parts of this discussion is really how you're thinking about enabling SRC Kenya to be way more resilient in the face of seeing kind of dried up donor funding, and thinking about how SRC is going to be able to take that forward with more value-added services across the ecosystem. Over to you.
All right. Thanks, Nic, and thanks, Song Bae. So, Nic, allow me to start with Song Bae's question, and then I'll come back to the resilience of ESOs. And I'll start by statistics that we've seen with commercial lenders. Out of every 10 loan applications or impact finance applications, 77 are dropped and only 3 are financed. And that comes down, what we've seen comes down to data that is provided to the decision maker. And what Song Bae said is a lot of this data is collected for the development sector or for the funder in terms of how many women have been funded and and so on and so forth. However, when it comes to financial institutions, and here is the whole range from grant providers, impact financials and all, the guy who we need to speak to is the credit officer who crunches numbers to make a decision whether to finance that business or not. And what they look at is financial ratios, the balance sheet, the P&L, can this business sustain itself, and what kind of value chain is it in, and all that. And so what we saw, and it has shifted a lot of our programming work and how we run our activities, is as SRC, we have 3 key pillars. We provide support to enterprises on accessing finance, accessing markets, and strengthening the internal business model. So if I speak to accessing finance, we did a pilot with a funder, and the second pilot was with Vula. And one of the funders, what we did is we went and asked the credit officer, what are you looking for us to give you the right pipeline of SMEs? And so that then we reduce that loss ratio of, for every 10, looking for finance, 7 are dropped. And so they gave us from the loan application form to all the things that they look for, the numbers, the revenues, and all that. And so we developed one of our programs on investor readiness that is geared towards answering the question of the credit officer so that then we can increase that success rate. And so we've seen that slightly change. So for now, the program that has ended this year and started 18 months ago, we've seen that increase to about 30% because we collected data and supported the SME to put their data in a data room. And then that data room was provided to the financier, and the financier was able to make a commercial decision on whether that is a fundable enterprise or not. And here I'm talking about the idea stage, growth stage SMEs that are looking for $10,000, $20,000, not the large tickets. And so this has then fundamentally looked at us, changing our model of operations to partnering with financiers or platforms like Vula. So Vula has this, list of financial institutions that are ready to provide finance and all types of finance in the range that there are. And so what we look fundamentally is what is that guy looking for, and what are the do's and don'ts that we ensure that our investor readiness curriculum is structured to closing that gap. And that's because we've seen with all the BDS that we do, training, technical assistance, an enterprise is established in order to grow. And in order to grow, then they need finance in whatever format, whatever stage. And then that is what, as ESOs, we need to fulfill. So we've seen that data really become deeper and more trusted. And the fact that as BDS providers, we're not usually trusted by financials. So once we submit a pipeline of SMEs, they might not even look at that. So this has closed that gap in terms of creating the trust among the SMEs. And then that will bring me to the second part of how we have shifted. And the shift came, I mean, the last 18 months, you've seen donors change strategies, get out of countries. And that fundamentally means a lot of ESOs have had a shift in terms of strategy, in terms of who is paying for BDS. Majority of the time, it has been the development partner paying us for the BDS to get the SMEs and do the technical assistance. But then there's always the question, can the SME actually pay for this BDS? And one of the things that it was a question for us in the last 5 years, and what we did is, again, we piloted with another partner who was with us for 3 years, and we asked them on the 4th year, can we at least charge for BDS of this? We piloted with $100 for a 2-month program. 60% of those participants, these were women SMEs, paid $100, the full price. 30% paid $50, and 10% paid $15. So we created concessions, but we were piloting to see what is the average price. So we didn't even use this price as a margin to see if it's sustainable. We just wanted to see what's the pocket of the SME that can pay for this BDS. But it is true that SMEs can pay for BDS. Now, the level of SMEs is now different. If we go to marginalized communities where we're lifting people from zero idea stage to something, that might be paid fully by somebody, a development sector actor. But it's important that we start piloting these areas where a growth stage SME with 2 employees and more, some turnover, cash flow coming in, can actually pay. The price ticket is what then, as a BDS, would need to look at. So, and then the third area that we've seen sustainability coming along is it is important to look at a lot of ESOs. The pipeline that we develop is not usually, is what we call missing middle. The full-blown commercial banks are at 20, we've seen, I think, 31% in Malawi interest ticket prices. And this is very expensive for missing middle SMEs that are growing, have not fully been able to transact 12 months of the year. So they're still having the nuances. And when we call them missing middle is because they've now graduated out of what donors would consider as idea stage SMEs. So that means then they're still somewhere where they're not recognized fully by commercial lenders, and for them to get fully in the market. So we are piloting with a partner, a revolving fund or an impact fund that looks at reducing the ticket size and the price, that's the interest rate, so that then they can, turn over the money, trade, and then eventually graduate and get to the commercial side. But this is also a trend that we've seen with ESOs as a discussion that's coming up, because now the moment you get into an impact fund, that's also revenue for the ESO in terms of sustainability. And that also reduces the hard question of who is paying for BDS. And if a donor exits the market, then the ESO tends to suffer in terms of, employee losses, and some have actually fully gone off the market. So this kind of sustainability models are what we are piloting. And it's not full data that we have, but it's data that we started with and said, can we ask ourselves this question and then pilot it and see if it works? We may have different iterations of SMEs paying for how much, whether the impact fund works for this particular level of SMEs, but it's important to get into the market and do this to see the sustainability model of it. And so I think I'll stop, Nic, by saying, as ESOs, and majority of us were in this session, as was taken earlier by Mentimeter, it's important to ask ourselves, in the next decade, in the next 2 decades, are we going to continue with the current model that we're running of having someone fully pay for BDS services, or what is the biggest blocker that is stopping us from getting SMEs to pay for these services and for us to run an ESO sustainably? I want to use the word profitably, but I know in the NGO sector, that's a tough word, but profitability is important, whether it's a non-profit or not, because then break even and remaining sustainable for the next 2 decades or more is important as ESOs. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kate. And I think that this last part is such an important part around this, because the more effective a BDS provider is, the more the more businesses that come out of it will be effective in the local ecosystem. And how do we create those incentive structures to ensure that the best BDS providers are not completely dependent on donors whose own agendas can ebb and flow with any of these markets? So, Kate, really thank you for sharing those three from the front lines. We know that we're going to be doing breakout sessions soon enough to be able to discuss in more detail some of the ways that we connect together. But yeah, thank you so much for your time here, and really looking forward to getting into discussions.
Yeah, thanks once again. Excellent, presentations, giving people lots of ideas, future looking. That's exactly what we need to be in this particular environment right now. So, and to be honest, Kate, you gave the perfect intro for Tom from Farm Africa to come in next.